his laugh. That's what I remember most. Not the room. Not the champagne glasses catching the light from the chandeliers above us. Not the sound of 140 people filling the atrium of the Fairmont Chateau in downtown Ottawa with 12 years of news, promotions, divorces, second babies, third careers. Just his laugh. The way it cut through everything like he still owned whatever room he walked into. I'd been standing near the registration table, rereading my name tag like it might say something different if I looked at it long enough. Hazel Morrison. Glebe Collegiate Institute, class of 2013. 12 years. I kept turning the lanyard over in my hands, not putting it on yet, telling myself I was just waiting for the lineup to clear. That was a lie, and I knew it. I almost didn't come. I'd received yes back in January when the email arrived, mostly because my friend Tanya had texted me approximately 47 times begging me not to make her go alone. Then Tanya got a last-minute work trip to Vancouver, and suddenly I was looking at a hotel booking I'd already paid for, and a dress I'd already bought, and no good reason to back out except the one I kept pretending wasn't a reason. Brendan Cole might be there. He was. Of course he was. I heard him before I saw him, that laugh again, coming from somewhere near the bar, loud and comfortable the way he'd always been loud and comfortable, the way some people just seem to take up space as a birthright. I turned without meaning to, the way you turn toward a sound that your body recognizes even when your brain is still catching up. He looked good. I won't pretend he didn't. He was wearing a charcoal blazer over a dark shirt, no tie, the kind of effortlessly put together that takes real effort. He'd filled out a little since high school, the kind of change that reads as settled rather than heavy. He was standing with a small cluster of guys I half recognized from the rugby team, holding his drink with one hand and gesturing with the other, mid-story, and everybody around him was leaning in. Some things don't change. I turned back toward the registration table and finally put my lanyard on. Here's the thing about Brendan Cole. We dated for almost 2 years, junior and senior year. He was funny and magnetic, and he made me feel, for a long time, like I'd been let in on something, like I was standing a little closer to the light than other people. That feeling is a drug when you're 17. It's a different thing entirely when you're older and you can name what it was. We broke up the summer after graduation, right before I left for nursing school at the University of Ottawa. He was staying local, had some plan involving his uncle's contracting business that never fully materialized into anything I could follow. The breakup was his idea, technically, though looking back I think we both knew it was coming. What I didn't know was the part that came after. About 3 weeks into my first semester, a mutual friend told me what Brendan had been saying around town. That I'd always thought I was better than everyone. That nursing school was my way of rubbing it in. That I'd basically checked out of our relationship months before it ended, because I was already mentally gone, already looking down at the life he was building. I remember sitting on my dorm room floor, back against the radiator, staring at the speckled linoleum and thinking, is that true? Did I make him feel that way? I spent longer than I should have on that question. Months, honestly. I second-guessed every choice I'd made in that relationship, replayed conversations looking for the moment I'd turned cold, wondering if the version of me he'd described to people was more accurate than the version I thought I was. Eventually, the clinical rotation started, and I didn't have the hours left to keep doing that. You can't spend a 12-hour shift in the ICU and come home with enough energy left to dismantle a dead relationship. You just can't. So I stopped. I graduated. I got my RN. I worked for 2 years on a general medical ward in Ottawa, then spent 8 months in Northern Ontario doing remote community health work that changed something fundamental in how I understand what I'm actually doing when I do this job. I came back to the city. I kept going. I hadn't spoken to Brendan in 12 years. Standing in the Fairmont atrium with my lanyard on and a glass of sparkling water in my hand that I hadn't touched yet, I was sincerely hoping to keep that record intact. I found a spot near the windows that looked out over the Rideau Canal, the water still and dark in the October evening. A few people drifted over and we talked. A woman named Faye, who was now a landscape architect in Montreal. A guy called Shepard, who taught high school history and had strong opinions about the parking situation near the Glebe. A quiet man named Ruben, whose name I couldn't place until I realized he'd been in my AP English class and had barely said 20 words the entire year, but was now, apparently, a CBC radio producer. I liked them. I liked the version of reunion that felt like just running into people you'd almost forgotten. For about 40 minutes, I genuinely relaxed. Then I felt someone appear at my shoulder. Hazel? Hazel Morrison? I turned. He was closer than I expected, close enough that I had to take a small step back to see him properly. Brendan was smiling, the specific smile he used when he already knew the answer to whatever he was about to ask. Hey, I said. Brendan? Wow. He looked me up and down once, the way that's just barely acceptable at a reunion and just barely inappropriate everywhere else. You came. I didn't think you'd actually show up. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. What are you up to these days? He asked, taking a sip of whatever he was drinking. Still doing the nursing thing? I am, yeah. Right. He nodded, the kind of nod that contains more commentary than the words that follow it. That's good. That's steady work. Especially, after everything. After everything. I had no idea what that was supposed to mean, but I'd learned long ago that Brendan Cole deployed vagueness with precision. Faye had drifted toward the canapé's table, and Shepard had spotted someone across the room, so it was just the two of us now, which felt less like coincidence and more like choreography. I heard you were in the north for a while, he said. Some kind of outpost thing? Remote community health work. Yeah, about 8 months. Huh. Another nod. That sounds noble. Very noble, Hazel. He said my name the way you'd say a word in a language you find slightly ridiculous. Must be nice to have that kind of freedom, no real ties holding you down. There it was. The thing he'd been walking toward this entire time. I said, I have plenty of ties. He tilted his head. Oh yeah? I just assumed. You're here alone, right? Didn't bring anyone? My husband dropped me off, I said. He's parking the car. Something moved across his face, small and fast. He recovered quickly. Oh, you got married? Good for you. A pause, just long enough. Though if he's still parking after this long, maybe he got lost. He smiled. Ottawa parking, A couple of the rugby guys had drifted closer, half listening with the attention of people who could pretend they weren't. So, what does he do? Brendan asked. Your husband. He's a pediatrician, I said. Pediatrician. He repeated it slowly, like he was trying on the word. Then he smiled again, wider this time. Right, of course he is. He glanced at the group around us. See, this is the thing about Hazel. Always had very specific ideas about what she wanted. Very specific. Must be nice when it all works out exactly the way you planned it, hey? I heard one of the rugby guys make a low sound that might have been agreement or might have been a laugh, and I felt something go very still inside me. Not anger, exactly. Something older and quieter than anger. I'd had 12 years of Brendan Cole taking up space in my head, not constantly. Not in the way of genuine grief, but in the small, persistent way of something you haven't fully put down. The question I'd never answered about whether he'd been right about me, whether I was the person he'd described to people the summer after graduation. And now he was standing in front of me at a hotel in downtown Ottawa doing the same thing he'd always done, framing my choices as criticisms of his, my life as an indictment of something he didn't want to examine too closely, and I felt suddenly very clear. Not because I had a comeback, I didn't, particularly. Not because I wanted to humiliate him in front of his friends, just because I could finally see it, 12 years on, in a blazer, holding a drink, in an atrium full of people he wanted to impress. He was still doing the same thing. Nothing had changed for him. Something had changed for me. I opened my mouth to say something, I'm not entirely sure what, and then I heard it. Sneakers, small, quick, the specific rhythm of a child in a hurry, squeaking slightly on the polished floor. Mama! I turned, coming across the atrium at a full run, clip-on tie flying sideways off the collar of his tiny button-down shirt was my son. He was 4 years old, and he was completely out of breath, and he was the most wonderful thing I had ever seen in my life. Teddy, I said, crouching down as he barreled into me. Hey, what happened to staying in the lobby with Daddy? Daddy said to come find you, he said, slightly muffled against my shoulder. Then he pulled back and looked past me at Brendan with the frank, unsettled curiosity that 4-year-olds aim at strangers. Who is that? An old friend, I said, which was generous. Teddy studied Brendan for another moment. Then he looked back at me with an expression I know well. His forehead slightly creased, his mouth pressed together at one corner. The face he makes when something doesn't quite add up. He doesn't look like a friend, Teddy said. Not loudly, but not quietly either. I heard somebody near us make a sound. I don't know what it was. I was trying very hard not to laugh. Teddy, I started. Mama, he interrupted, pulling on my sleeve with the focused urgency of someone delivering critical information. Daddy says he found the parking spot and he's coming now, and also can we go see the canal after, because I want to see if there are ducks. We can check on the ducks, I said. Daddy said probably no ducks in October, but maybe. Daddy is probably right. Teddy seemed satisfied with this. He turned back to Brendan, because 4-year-olds have no concept of a graceful exit. Your tie is better than mine, he said, pointing at Brendan's shirt. Mine's fake. He demonstrated by pulling the clip-on off entirely and holding it out for inspection. See? Clip-on. Dad says real ones are complicated. Brendan said something. I don't remember what. I was watching the doorway. Dex came in the way he always comes into rooms, without any particular awareness that he's doing anything remarkable. He'd changed out of his work clothes and was in dark jeans and a gray sweater, his ID badge still clipped to his jacket pocket from his shift earlier because he always forgets to take it off. He was scanning the room for me with the slightly distracted look he gets when he's been thinking about something on the drive over and hasn't fully surfaced yet. I raised one hand. He found me. The way his face changed when he saw Teddy already at my side, the relief and the fondness all happening at once, is something I will never get tired of watching. He crossed the room, settled a hand on Teddy's head briefly, looked at me for a second the way we look at each other when we're checking in without saying anything. Then he noticed Brendan. I watched Brendan's face as Dex extended his hand and said his name, Dr. Dexter Okafor. I watched something shift behind Brendan's eyes, something that started as a recalibration and ended somewhere I recognized. Not quite pale, but close. The kind of color change that happens when someone's internal calculations don't arrive at the number they expected. Dex shook his hand, said something polite. The kind of polite that Dex does naturally, and I've always found genuinely admirable, because it doesn't cost him anything, and it doesn't mean anything either. Brendan smiled back with about 60% of his earlier confidence intact. Then Teddy tugged on Dex's sleeve and said, loudly, Daddy, that man said Mama planned her whole life. Is that true? Dex looked down at him. I think Mama made good choices, he said. What's the difference? Dex crouched down to Teddy's level. Planning is when you know exactly what's going to happen. Good choices are when you don't know, but you pick the right thing anyway. Teddy thought about this with full-body seriousness. Then he said, "Mama picks good things." "She does," Dex agreed. "Like me. Especially you." Teddy appeared enormously pleased by this. He put his clip-on tie back on, slightly crooked, and reached up to take my hand and then took Dex's hand with the other and stood there between us like someone completing a circuit. I looked at Brendan. He was still there, still holding his drink, but the ease had gone out of his posture in a way that was subtle and complete. He looked like a man who had been very confident about a story he was telling and had reached a part he didn't remember writing. "It was good to see you," I said. I meant it, actually, in the detached way you can mean something that's also over. Brendan said something back. Something like, "Yeah, for sure, good to catch up." The words that exist to fill the space where other words used to be. We moved away. Teddy immediately wanted to investigate the dessert table, which was across the room and involved a significant amount of negotiation about whether he could have 2 mini cheesecakes or 1. Dex's position was 1. Teddy's position was 2. They were still actively debating it when we reached the other side of the atrium, Teddy making a careful and methodical case that 2 small things were equivalent to 1 regular thing, and therefore it was basically the same. I looked back once, across the room. Brendan was back with his group of rugby guys. He was talking, gesturing with his drink. The performance reassembled. But there was something slightly off about it. Like a song being played in the right key, but at the wrong tempo. Something that would be invisible to anyone who didn't know what it looked like when it was right. I turned back to my family. Teddy had won the cheesecake debate somehow. Dex was holding 2 small plates, a man who knows he lost, wearing the expression of a man he lost but isn't entirely sure when it happened. Teddy was already eating with the focused intensity he brings to everything he loves, his clip-on tie still slightly crooked against his little collar. "Did you know that man?" Dex asked me, handing me a glass of water he'd grabbed from a passing tray. "We dated in high school," I said. Dex nodded, took this in. "Was he always like that?" I thought about it. "Yeah," I said, "pretty much." He nodded again, not judgmentally. Just the quiet acknowledgement of someone who already had all the information he needed. We stayed another hour and a half. I talked to Faye again about her work in Montreal, and she gave me her card and said, if I ever wanted to come visit, she knew a brilliant restaurant near the plateau that I'd love. Shepard introduced me to his wife, who taught kindergarten and had exactly the same energy as him. Warm and slightly indignant about municipal infrastructure. Ruben and I talked for 20 minutes about a documentary series he was developing, and I told him, honestly, that it sounded extraordinary. Teddy fell asleep in the car on the way home, his head tipped against the window, his clip-on tie finally surrendering to gravity in his lap. Dex drove. I watched the lights along the Rideau Parkway, the trees just past peak color in the October dark, the odd lit window in the houses along the water. "He said something, didn't he?" Dex said. It wasn't quite a question. "Yeah. Do you want to talk about it?" "Not really," I said. "Not because it bothers me, just because I don't think it needs that much time." He reached over and put his hand over mine for a moment. Didn't say anything else. That's one of the things I love best about him. He knows when a thing has already been handled. In the back seat, Teddy made a small sound in his sleep, resettling, and the clip-on tie slid off his lap onto the seat beside him. I thought about what he'd said back in the atrium, the matter-of-fact confidence of it. Mama picks good things. I'd spent a long time, after that summer 12 years ago, wondering if the version of me Brendan had described to people was the true one, the one who thought she was better than everyone, the one who was already gone. I'd looked for that version inside myself the way you look for a structural crack in a wall, carefully, dreading what you might find. I never found her. But it took me years to trust that absence. What I found instead, slowly, across nursing school and night shifts and 8 months of fly-in community work in places that didn't appear on the maps Brendan Cole thought about. What I found was just me, someone who made choices, mostly good ones, sometimes wrong ones, and kept going. Someone who ended up here. There were no ducks on the canal that night, as predicted. Teddy was asleep before we even got to the bridge, but in the morning, Dex took him down to the water while I was still drinking my first coffee, and I watched from the window as Teddy spotted something. A heron, I think, standing absolutely still near the far bank, and grabbed his father's hand and pointed with his whole arm, vibrating with the effort of staying quiet so he wouldn't scare it away. Dex crouched down next to him. They stayed like that for a long time, both of them completely still, watching. That's the part I keep coming back to, not the atrium. Not Brendan's face recalibrating in real time. Not even Teddy's clip-on tie or the cheesecake negotiation or the things that were, in the moment, objectively satisfying. Just that window. That morning. My son holding his father's hand beside a canal in October, still as a heron, hoping not to scare something beautiful away. That's the life I built. Not the one I planned, exactly. Better than that.